We've had an unofficial theme this year, exploring how lawyers think about and engage with the media to expand public understanding of our cases and our causes. And coincidentally, there happened to be this podcast that came out called Serial, and the first season highlighted many of the issues about which we've been speaking. And it was insanely popular. So we are very pleased to have Rabia Chaudry, the lawyer who started it all for Serial, to Stanford to discuss exactly these issues. Rabia's bio is much longer than I can really go through and give justice here. She's a practicing attorney. She's president of the Safe Nation Collaborative. She's a National Security Fellow at the New America Foundation and a senior consultant on countering violent extremism, or CVE. She is a fellow at the Truman National Security Project, a fellow of the American Muslim Civic Leadership Institute, and a fellow of the Shalom Hartman Institute. She speaks and writes frequently on issues related to diaspora Muslim communities. Rabia is here thanks to my friend and colleague, Umbreen Bhatti. Umbreen is a lawyer. She practiced with the ACLU, and she just finished up a year fellowship with the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowship Program here at Stanford. During her fellowship, Umbreen created Briefly TV to connect TV journalists with powerful untold stories about our legal system. Prior to her fellowship, she co-founded and ran Islamics, a nonprofit effort to demystify Islamic law in the American news media. So thanks to our co-sponsors for this event, the John S. Knight Fellowship Program at Stanford and the Stanford Criminal Justice Center, and thanks so much to Joni and to Debbie for all their help today. Special thanks to Umbreen. And just quickly, we know a lot of people are here because they have a lot of interest in Serial and the underlying case that made up the podcast. That is not exactly what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about advocacy in the media and kind of this case study that Serial has given us for that. So we will have a Q&A at the end of the session. You can come down to these microphones. But please try to focus your questions on the topic that we're here to discuss as opposed to the underlying facts. So that's it, I think. Twitter. Thank you so much. Twitter.
Just one thing that Rabia just reminded me, because she's such an avid tweeter, that you can tweet and hashtag and add us and do all kinds of stuff. And I don't have my phone here on purpose because I don't want to see what it is just yet. So Rabia, thank you so much for leaving the blizzard in DC.
And that was hard to do.
You're a lawyer, but you have said repeatedly that you're not Adnan's lawyer. So tell us about your relationship with the case.
So Adnan went to he went to a high school in the same community that my family lived in, and my brother and him were best friends, and they met when they were in freshman high school. I used to see Adnan hanging out at my parents' house a lot. He was like my little brother, you know. And it's a very tightly knit community that's all centered around a very large mosque in the Baltimore area. So I didn't live with my family at the time. I was a married woman. I had a kid. I lived in the next state over. But almost every weekend I was at my parents' house, and I just, I would see Adnan, and so. But I knew his parents very well. They're family friends. They literally live in the same subdivision as my parents. So we were like family friends. And that was it.
And how did you get involved with the case?
I mean, when Hayman disappeared, I actually remember every Friday to Sunday I would visit my parents, and almost every Friday I'd watch the evening news, the local news, and see repeatedly that this young girl is still missing. And my brother told me that she goes to school with Adnan, and he also told me they had been dating for a bit. So every week we were just kind of concerned and keeping on top of it. And then one weekend when I was there, the news popped up, like all the local news, that an arrest has been made, and Adnan's photo came up. And I was there, my mother was there, we were just watching TV in the living room, and we were shocked. So we immediately headed over to his parents' house, and since that time, basically, we just acted as kind of a moral support system. Of course, we were very concerned for Adnan, for the case, but the community rallied to get him an attorney, and I wasn't involved with that process. Adnan would call me and my family from prison. We were probably the closest family to their family at the time, and still are in many ways. For the preceding year and a half, as the trials went on, we stayed in touch over the phone. I visited him. My family would visit him, and we didn't talk about the case a lot. hardly ever at all. It was just like, when you talk to a loved one, how are you doing? What's happening at home? And giving him moral support.
You'd mentioned, I think, at some point in the podcast or on your blog that you were a law student at the time.
Yeah.
So did you use anything that you were learning, or what was the relationship between, your current life and the case?
I'm sure this is a fantastic law school. But when I was in law school, there wasn't a lot that I learned that I could apply practically. I was just trying to figure out what torts meant at that time. And, but what was very stressful for me was that I was really the only person in the community who had ventured away from like medicine and other fields that we commonly go into and had gone to law school. And for that reason, a lot of people did approach me and said, what do you think we should do? How should we? And I kept saying, listen, I can't help in this situation at all. You have to defer to, you got to get some experts on this, talk to the lawyers who have experience. But at the same time, as I was sitting through the trial, there were many, many times when I thought, you just know that things are not going right. And I remember thinking that as a first or second year law student, somebody could try this case better or defend it better.
What was your relationship with the lawyers who were representing him? So we know from the podcast a little bit about your relationship with Cristina Gutierrez, but not a whole lot, honestly. And I don't think we really know anything about your relationship with his lawyers right now. So tell us about that.
Really nobody had a relationship with Cristina Gutierrez except for Adnan himself. His family, after having tried to approach her many times unsuccessfully, asked me to accompany them for meetings, and so I would try, and it was just really terrible experiences. She was extremely antagonistic and rude to the family and to me, and essentially said that you're not my client, I don't have to answer your questions. So the family would say, what's your strategy? What witnesses are you going to call? Just general questions about where she's taking the case and how she's going to prepare. And there had been a trial. The first trial lasted 3 days, ended in a mistrial. There's about a month in between before the second trial started. And that was really a time the family had even more questions because they could kind of see where the state was going. But she refused to answer questions. So that didn't go too well. Shortly after he was convicted, she was fired, and that's actually, I told them you have to get rid of her. During the trial, I never said that to them because I didn't know if that was even possible in the middle of a trial to be like, you got to get rid of your lawyer. But since that time, I've been kind of with them as they've selected new attorneys. I've met with every attorney they've looked at, and for the last 5-6 years, Justin Brown has been his post-conviction attorney, and we stay in contact fairly frequently, excuse me.
Did you talk to him before you took the case to media?
Okay, no, I did not.
Okay, tell us more.
I didn't talk to Adnan. I did not talk to him. Well, here's the thing. I had asked Adnan many times over the years about taking the case to media. And the reason for that was I thought there were a lot of really kind of weird layers in the case, weird characters in the case, things that happened that shouldn't have happened, a lot of things that kind of captured our interest with Serial. And I thought it would be the kind of story that the media would be interested in, especially like a local reporter. I don't know if it's, and we always kind of consulted with the family and decided, not yet. Let's wait till the post-conviction appeal. That was like our big fish. We thought we're going to hit post-conviction, we're going to introduce Asia McClain, and it's all going to be taken care of. So we had the post-conviction appeal. During the hearing, beforehand, we sent a private investigator out to find her, and she wouldn't come. So we had waited 10 years, and now she refused to testify, and that was a blow. When we were at the hearing, I testified about how I met her and found this alibi witness that had been overlooked. The former prosecutor took the stand and said that, she called me and said she was pressured into, creating these documents. So at that moment, we just knew. We're like, we've lost on this issue, And so we were waiting for the judge's decision in the post-conviction. And one night I watched the latest installment in the series on the West Memphis 3. And I think the last movie is called West of Memphis. And it was like 1 a.m. and I turned off the TV and I'm like, because I remember watching the earlier films and being convinced of their guilt. And then watching this one, and it flipped everything on its head. And I realized at that point the power of media, storytelling, journalists. I was like, whatever. There's nothing to lose now. We don't have Asia. What are we waiting for at this point? We can only go up from here. So I just, that night, Googled a reporter that had covered the case in 99. I found Sarah's name. She was the first name I found. I reached out to her, and within 2 days, we had a meeting set up.
Okay, so many questions. So the first thing I really want to know about that is that you must have then had a conversation at some point with Adnan and Justin, right? And so what?
Well,
how did
Adnan,
those
yes.
go? Okay, so
Justin, no.
okay, so tell us first about the conversation with Adnan.
I think spoke to Adnan in the couple of weeks after that. Well, actually, I met with Sarah first because I wasn't sure if she was be interested in the case. I met with Sarah. My brother was with her, and you guys probably heard him also in the first episode. And after that, she took documents and she came back to us after a few weeks and said, "Yeah, I'm interested in this case." At that point, I said I need to talk to Adnan. But I first got back up. I talked to his family. And one of the reasons Adnan had given over the years of not taking it to the media was because he knew how painful it had been for his family during the trial. And to revisit all of that, to revisit the things he had been doing, he was a kid, but he still carried that guilt of publicly kind of shaming his family that he was sleeping around, that he was smoking pot. So he wanted to kind of shelter them from that. So I went and spoke to his mother first, because she was really she's the backbone of the family. And I said, this is a concern that Adnan has, but I've always wanted to go to the media. I found a reporter who has the capacity and ability to do some really great, investigative work on this. And, I did not know this was going to be, actually Sarah didn't know this was going to be a 10-part series. We thought maybe it'll be like a 1-hour show on This American Life. So anyhow, his mom said that, I don't care about what anybody has to say. I want somebody to find the truth and get my son home. So when his mother gave me that pass, I was like, all right, I'll fine, And I told Adnan, I said, I talked to your mom. And frankly, his mother was kind of stunned. She never realized all these years that he didn't want to hurt his family any further, so he didn't want to talk to the media about it. So then he was fine. As long as his family was okay, he was fine.
And Justin?
I let Adnan tell Justin, and Adnan did tell him that he consented and he was fine with it. So, Justin is great. He's an amazing attorney. He's a total advocate. He believes in Adnan's innocence. And he's very inclusive, and he's the way an attorney should be with a family, that's going through this. But he's also very cautious. And so sometimes you kind of have to just jump the gun, and we did. And also, at that point, I will point out this. Justin also was at the point where he thought he's pretty much done with the case after 5 years. So we were in this weird period where if post-conviction looked like we were going to lose it, and we were probably going to be done, he was probably going to be done representing Adnan.
And if you were representing Adnan, would you have reached out for media attention?
At this stage in the case, yeah.
What were you considering?
What would I?
What was going through your mind? What would have made you decide that?
Because what I realize is, as attorneys, obviously, as attorneys representing Adnan, you're bound by certain principles and rules. There are things you can and cannot do. Even as somebody attached to the case or attached to not to the case, but to Adnan's family, I couldn't be knocking on, doors of witnesses. I couldn't be saying, "Hey, Asia, I need to talk to you. Jay, I want to have a conversation." We are bound by so many things that an investigative journalist or reporter is not bound by, right? They also have resources. They have ways of getting people to talk, and I feel like they're just better equipped at getting a lot of information the rest of us can't.
So what did you hope would come of it? And also, actually, to add to that, what did you also realistically think would come of it?
Honestly, I don't know. But I hope there was one smoking gun type of thing. I thought maybe, we had tried over the years. Asia was kind of lost to us at the time that I contacted Sarah, but we thought, Asia's narrative was that she had been in the library with Adnan at the time, and he was checking his emails, or he was on email. And for years, we just hit a wall. We couldn't get those email records. We couldn't get any information. I thought, well, maybe somebody like Sarah Koenig could, Maybe she can have, maybe she can find people who are connected to the case, who know something, who'd be willing to talk to somebody else after 15 years, but they wouldn't talk to us. But I was hoping for a smoking gun, something that could clearly help exonerate Adnan.
Did you think about the medium at all? Did you care that this might be radio or a podcast? I think you'd mentioned at some point, actually, that you didn't know what a podcast was before it started.
The funny thing is, when I started looking for, literally that night, I was looking for reporters, and I thought the best positioned person would be a local crime reporter who really knows the beat, who has like deep sources, like, in that community, who knows the lawyers and judges. And I just hit Sarah's name, although it's totally serendipity, and I'll explain to you why later, but I hit Sarah's name, and actually when she responded to me, and I was like, I didn't even know, I had never listened to a podcast, I didn't really know who she was in terms of how big a deal she was at the time. And when she responded to me, I was a little bit like, do I really want like a radio show? Like a 1-hour radio show? Like, what is that going to do for us, right? Like, I mean, because I thought if it's a local reporter, this is going to be something that's really going to draw the attention of local officials, of the DA's office, and be much more impactful. So it was odd because when she said, yeah, we want to do this, there was still like in my mind, I'm like, God, I don't know if this is the right. And I kept thinking, and I actually said to Sarah, I said, do you think you could work with a Baltimore Sun reporter also so that person could like bring more public attention? And nobody knew. And it was only, it was about a month or 6 weeks or so before it aired, or actually maybe a couple of months before it aired. She said, there's so much information. I think we're going to do like 10 or 12 shows. And I think I told you. And I told some other people, and they're like, no, This American Life doesn't do 10 or 12 shows like about the same. That's not how it works. And
I actually think that exchange was with me. And
I would, yeah.
And I remember that you had told me about this actually, many months ago, and you said, I've got this, like, there's this guy, and like this thing happened, and I remember saying to you, like, can you just send me an email? Like, just tell me what it is. Like, can I get a blurb? And then I can help you find some news coverage for it. Because at the time I was a fellow here in the journalism program, and you just like couldn't do the blurb. Like, it was so hard to write this story. And then you came back and said, well, This American Life is going to do like 10 episodes. And I was like, no, they're not. Like, they don't do that. Like, that's not This American Life's MO. Like, I'm not sure that's going to happen, but that's cute,
I'm pretty sure she thought I was crazy at the time. That's the thing about this thing. Like, there are over the years, and even people who are very, very, like, who knew Adnan growing up, all these kids, they kind of didn't know exactly what happened at trial. They didn't really attend the trial. They were in school, a lot of them. They grew up, they had families, they got married. And over the years, I would meet them every so often, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm still in touch with Adnan. And when even trying to explain you just can't. You cannot explain, there's this guy who stumbled across the body, and then there's a polygraph, and there's this guy's there's so many details that are to the case that blurbs don't work for this case. And so
let me pause you on that though, because you must have sent something to Sarah. So what was in the email that you sent to Sarah? Like, how did you frame the story?
I framed the story that I said, first of all, I was like, I don't want her to think I'm a crackpot. I was like, I'm a fellow with the New American Foundation. This is my bio. And I have been a family friend of somebody who was wrongfully convicted 15 years ago. And there's a lot of really weird things about the case, and there's a lot of ambiguities. And I don't know if you'd be interested, but you covered the case, or you covered a story about his attorney many, many years ago. And she was. And so when she came in, I just showed her some of the documents to show. And even then, it was like me and my brother, like, my brother's like, oh, then this happened. I was like, oh, then this happened. And I'm sure she was like, just both of you shut up. So she took a lot of the documents so she could kind of work through them. And I think within a couple of weeks, she was like, yeah, I want to do this.
What did you pull out of the like 3,000 documents to show her?
One of the documents I remember I pulled out was the report about Neighbor Boy. And the Neighbor Boy report, I don't know if you guys remember, but there was somebody had called the police department a few months after Adnan had been arrested and said, listen, my daughter was hanging out with this kid who was from the neighborhood. We all know each other. And he told her this really kind of troubling story about seeing this young Asian girl's body in the trunk of a car. It turns out that this father was so disturbed that he called the police. The police came, they talked to him, they talked to the daughter, and she said, yeah, this is exactly what he said. Now, I thought, had to have taken this very seriously to call the police and make a report. And I had never heard of this report. It never came up in any of the trials. So when I got the files, and I didn't get the attorney files for at least maybe 6 or 8 months after Adnan had been convicted, and I found this document. It's just a one-page, very simple report. And, like my mind was blown. I'm like, who is this person who said they saw the body in the trunk of the car? And it turns out this is somebody who is a friend of Jay's and grew up with Jay. And I thought either this person, if this person was useful to the prosecution, right, they would have called him at trial. If he was useful to the defense, they should have turned it over because it wasn't in Gutierrez's, as far as maybe Maybe it was, actually. I can't remember. But the point is, like, nobody had ever heard of him. Like, so what happened in this story? So that was one of the things that I shared with her. Another one was the polygraph reports of the person who had found the body. And I know polygraphs are not admissible in most jurisdictions. But still, I mean, his story was a little bit odd. And then I I didn't give her all the trial transcripts, but I did explain how the key witnesses' testimony had changed many, many times. And so from there, she did the rest of the research herself.
So I know your personal connection to the case is clear, of course. Were you looking at it as a lawyer? Like, did you look at it and think something about this case seems legally off, and this might help us advance something in court? Or I think I'm still trying to get at what your mission was by taking it to press in the first place.
My mission was that we needed new evidence. We needed some new evidence to get back in court. You can file another additional post-conviction appeal if you have new evidence. Like, the new evidence we had was Asia McClain, and we lost her, right? So the idea was maybe Sarah can uncover something that would be considered new evidence and would help. Obviously, for me, this is not about a show. I didn't even know, nobody knew it was going to be like this big. This was about the case. Or to find some piece of evidence that would just lead straight to like some kind of exoneration. When she was able to get the Innocence Project on it, I mean, I was floored because I just didn't expect it. We had never discussed it with her. I didn't know she had certain contacts, with Innocence Project, and she didn't expect it. So, I just didn't know what she could bring, but I knew she could do what I couldn't do. Number one. The second thing is I never approached this as an attorney for a couple of reasons. Number one, I've never done criminal defense. So even though I can sit in a trial and say, wow, she is really screwing up, I can't tell you, I don't have the experience to say, okay, well, that motion was ruled on correctly and these are our recourse. But I know that she screwed up because she didn't provide a defense. I know she screwed up because she didn't check out an alibi witness. She screwed up because she didn't call to trial, the four other girls that Don was seeing at the time, right? I knew all the ways she had screwed up. And when it's this closely personal, that's what it's about. It's about him. It's about his family. I can't look at it as an attorney. I don't write about it as an attorney either. There's a couple of great lawyers who are writing about it like that. They're looking at the legal issues. Colin Miller, Susan Simpson, they've got great blogs. I don't ever write about it from a legal perspective.
So in your work, you're a practicing immigration lawyer.
I don't practice anymore. I've stopped practicing a while ago. Okay. But yeah.
So you've been a practicing immigration lawyer for some time. And you've done a lot of work around the rights of Muslim Americans in this country. Mm-hmm. So what's the interplay between that work and your perspective on this case? Do you feel like it shaped your view on the case, or that the case shaped your view on those issues?
It's so weird to me. Like, I don't know if it was like kind of a fog of like shock during the time of the trial or what it was, but it was like, every time like these weird mentions of the Muslim community and Muslim practices and rituals, which are totally unconnected to the case, and it was being framed as like this honor killing and this young boy. I mean, like the very first time this came up was when, a bail hearing, the judge denied bail for him, and the state's argument was that, he's this young Pakistan male who is going to take off. He's killed a woman, and the community will help him leave because this is acceptable. Like, this is what they do. It's okay. And so I remember, and I wasn't there at that hearing, but I heard so much about it from other people because they were like, oh my God, we can't believe like what they're saying about us. But during the trial, we were always uncomfortable hearing those things. We just didn't know what to do with that discomfort. And it wasn't until maybe about 6 or 7 years ago when I revisited the whole case file that it all kind of came flooding back. And I honestly, until then, even after 9/11, even after doing all this work on anti-Muslim bias and issues like that, the disconnect remained until about 6 or 7 years ago. And that's when I was like, oh my God, this is what was happening, and we didn't have the words for it. We weren't able to name it. We didn't have a strategy for it. And obviously, our lawyer, Gutierrez, had no idea what to do with it.
And so what bridged that disconnect?
What bridged that disconnect?
What made all this come together in your mind?
Because when I went back and I started reading the transcripts again, because now, like after 9/11, doing like all this work in all these years, immediately can sense it. I mean, it hits you in the face, right, when it happens. It hits you in the face when you read the words like honor killing and besmirched and Muslim male and things like that. And we've all become, anybody who does activism on these issues, very alert to those things. So that's what bridged the gap. I'm like, oh, this is what was happening. And for some reason, even all of my own experiences as a Muslim American, where I was clearly discriminated against or something very big had happened, it was kind of like a pre-9/11 racism and a post-9/11 racism, which brought terrorism to the forefront of these issues, right? Because from 9/11 forward is all about combating the stereotype of us Muslims being terrorists. But many stereotypes existed before that. And I just...
So say a little bit more about that, about pre-9/11 versus post-9/11, because I have seen a lot of mentions about the fact, well, this was pre-9/11, and so it wasn't the same climate. So what was the climate then?
It was a climate that we didn't, we didn't really, it wasn't articulated, but it existed and we all knew it existed. We were still talking about, the first Gulf War had happened, right? Not Without My Daughter, that movie had happened. Iran hostage crisis, the first World Trade Center. But lots of things had already contributed to the psyche, the American psyche about what it means to be a Muslim, what are the gender dynamics. And there was actually an excellent report that I don't know if it came out after 9/11, but about the portrayal of Muslim men and Arab men in particular in Hollywood, and it's always been along the same lines. This very controlling, possessive man who keeps his women covered and owns them. So those things were there. I grew up. I grew up outside of city areas and a lot of kind of country areas, and a number of times as a child faced people who called me, a sand nigger and towelhead and things of that sort. But again, it wasn't like, I don't know why, I think it was, we would just think it's a one-off. But our overwhelming experience was a positive experience being an American Muslim.
So were you thinking at all about the impacts on anybody else when you took the case forward? So when you reached out to Sarah Koenig, who was on your mind besides Adnan? Anybody?
Adnan and his parents.
What about Hayes' family?
The thing about Hayes' family, it was, I don't know if you remember the episode where Adnan talked about being in the courtroom and seeing Hayes' parents, or her mother and brother and community, because really the Korean community was there supporting them, and us also being in this position where really for all these weeks when she disappeared, we were all very concerned, and then all of a sudden, in a weird way, we're not pitted against each other. And so it's like this grief you feel for them, but an overwhelming grief you feel for your own struggle and loss and the trauma you're going through. But I do firmly believe that justice for Hay means having the right person in jail for her murder.
How about everyone else who's involved? So of course, Hayes' family and Adnan are the two people that come to mind, but there are a lot of witnesses who had a pretty low profile before this and have a much higher profile now. The attorneys who were practicing in Maryland who are national names now. Was any of that on your mind?
No.
And how do you follow that up?
I can't have all these competing interests of, I have to have a primary interest here in order to keep moving forward, right? If I'm going to weigh the interests of every single person, this is a public trial. Mm-hmm. These are people who publicly testified. These are people who collectively put away this young man without a full investigation. I had no qualms about bringing them back to what happened, reminding them that he's still there. Okay. When Sarah told me that, she's going to be not using full names of certain very key people, I said, why? These are the people, this is the people responsible for this, right? I still honored her during that time, during the entire serial show. I would redact, Jay's last name and this and that. I would angrily redact it. I'd redact the damn thing. I didn't want to. And I feel no sense of obligation to them.
So what about the impact on Adnan more specifically? And what I'm really thinking of here is, I want to say it's episode 11, in which you really sense some ambivalence from him about the podcast. And again, that's the storytelling, and I'm sure there's more to it, but it was hard not to listen to that episode and walk away feeling like, oh, I don't know if I should have been listening to this whole show. And so I wonder, like, how did you navigate that throughout the process? Were you in sort of constant contact with Adnan, and you didn't know what you were getting into on some level, and neither did he. Right. So how did you guys deal with that?
I mean, look, going into it, Adnan, when I talked about it early on with Adnan, I said, look, if we maintain that this is your truth, this is your reality, I mean, the worst that could happen is she finds something that makes you look bad, and then what? You have life plus 30 years. Then what? You're going to live out your life plus 30 years. But now the world will also feel like you deserve to be there. I was like, in the end of the day, does that matter? Versus the potential of something really dramatic happening and her finding something that could be instrumental and helping change your situation. So we had to just adopt the mindset that we're going to take the bad with the good. And that particular episode, the ambivalence Adnan felt is not so much of the podcast. It was really about his relationship with Sarah. And that has been complicated. It's been complicated for him. It's been complicated for all of us, for the family, and we operate kind of, it's like your official relationship with her, but then we're kind of friends, right? I mean, we literally had like a screaming match at each other 2 weeks ago, me and Sarah. And she's like, I thought you were my friend. I'm like, what the hell? I don't know what we are, because
how do we define the relationship?
Yeah. Right? But yeah, so his in that 18-page letter that he wrote to her, and I'll talk about a couple other letters he wrote to her too. I want to mention those. Was him saying that I don't know what the hell to do with you, because she had visited him many, many times. He knew about her family. He knew about her kids. He knew, he'd spoken to the kids on the phone. I mean, so now it's like this. But then there were instances in the podcast, and I was periodically printing transcripts and sending them to him. And one in particular, in which he talks about his relationship with Gutierrez. I was livid, and I talked to him literally the day after he called me, and I have no control on when he's going to call me.
What were you livid about?
I was livid because I thought Sarah was really easy on Gutierrez, number one. She broke the record for attorney complaints in the state of Maryland, okay? Emptied out the grievance fund. And for Sarah to talk to one other family and then 28 others who, probably had much more similar situations to Adnan than this particular family. I don't know why she did that. And I think, Sarah kind of chalked it up to she was sick. You can be sick and not perform well, but I don't believe you can attribute being crooked to MS, okay, to lying to your client to MS. To me, that doesn't make sense to me. Many, many times she just straight out lied to her clients. And that I can't let go that, she was sick. Right. So, but beyond that, what really upset me was that the clip that was aired of Adnan was him talking about how, she was my mother, my brother, my father, my police officer, I don't know, all these great things. And she was very protective. And so Adnan called me the next day and I said, listen, you have in the court a claim pending for ineffective assistance to counsel. And you are on the air talking about how lovely she was to you. What happened here, right? And he was like, listen, every time I've talked to Sarah, I've told her the same thing, that this was my relationship to her as a 17-year-old who would get visited by the attorney, his attorney in prison. He's like, but I had no idea what was happening outside. I did not know she was not contacting my witnesses. I did not know she was treating my family like this. I did not know she was taking money for things that she did not fulfill, like expert witnesses, taking busing the jury here and there. So he said, I explained that to Sarah numerous times. He's like, that was always a partial conversation. He's like, that's a partial conversation. My whole conversation was that what I know, immediately after my conviction is what I didn't know then. And what she aired was just him saying, during the trial, so that wasn't cool. And so, I sent him the transcript of the show, and he also read it. And I think that was really hurtful to him, because at that point, he did not understand that. He can understand that what's happening between him. He's like, are you trying to tell the full story? Or why did you frame like this and other things in a way that makes it unclear on where I stand?
So back up a little bit and tell us about what he knew or what his expectation of the show would be. And I'm asking that because, I'm not sure. Maybe he is a This American Life listener, but my guess is no. And so he, what did he have any sense of like what this might turn out to be? And what was his sort of mechanism for providing feedback? And, could he have stepped out of it at any point?
Oh, absolutely. None of this could have happened without him saying, okay. I mean, Sarah still could have done the show the way she did the show without being able to interview other people if she wanted to. But his voice would then have been missing from it. And I think for Adnan especially, and then what happened was, now what was interesting was, so I contacted Sarah, I think in about October, November of last year. Within a month or two, we got the denial and the post-conviction. I mean, I knew it was coming. So again, that was a big, big door that had been shut in our face. So we were also in a position of what now, right? We have no other new evidence. We have nowhere to go. And then within a month, she was able to talk to Asia McClain and get that interview. And when she called me and said, I just talked to Asia, and she totally remembers everything about that day. And this was a few months after the prosecutor said, well, she said she made those documents under duress and whatever. That brought Asia back into play, right, for us. We didn't know how to legally make it happen, but it means that she remembered that day, and she still, remember the details, and I was floored. So I think when that happened for me and Adnan and for his family, we realized the value of Sarah and what she could do.
And what was your communication with Sarah throughout the show?
It was really kind of as needed. So if she would need something, she would need to do more interviews, need to do documents, she needed contact information for people, but if there was some like a major development like the Asia thing or like the Innocence Project thing, then she told us. Then she was like, because she also, she's just a total class act and very professional, and she also knew, and she started working with Adnan's attorney too, and she wanted to share with him anything that could be helpful. So when there was but all this time I didn't know who she had interviewed, who she had not interviewed. I didn't know what those people had said. I didn't know what Jay had said. I didn't know any of this, But if it was something that could really impact Adnan's case, then she did let us know,
As lawyers, I feel like when we take cases to seek media coverage on them, a lot of times we don't, right? We don't even do that because you lose control.
Yeah.
And that's not something that you're comfortable with, probably if you're in this profession, but it's also something that you don't want to do to jeopardize your client in any way. And you stayed in the story. So I want to know a little bit more about that. Like, did they know did the serial team know you were going to blog?
No, I didn't know I was going to blog.
So when did you decide to blog?
So what happened was, as Sarah was, and her investigation went on for quite a while, and I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this one long form piece all about like the case, not the case, Adnan and his family, maybe like a 8-pager and submit it to the Atlantic, just a one-shot deal. And when it turned out there was going to be a new podcast, which I didn't even know, I had never listened to a podcast before, and the very first episode aired, immediately there were like 10 things I wanted to say in response to it. And I had a blog. I was blogging on different issues that have already gotten me in lots of trouble on other things. But I immediately, my visceral reaction was like, I can't wait for like a 10-page article in the Atlantic that might or might, I need to like respond immediately. And then I saw the reaction online, like on Twitter, and this Reddit subreddit popped up very quickly. And I realized people wanted stuff like now, and I had things to say now. So I let 2 episodes go by, then I wrote the first blog, and I thought, okay, every couple of episodes I'll kind of do a wrap-up, I'll give a response. And I also realized at that point that, Sarah's telling a story, but I want to tell Adnan's story. I want to elevate his narrative in this. And after I think it was the 3rd episode, actually the first few episodes, every time I would blog, I would get a message from Sarah, I'd be like, listen, can you kind of like, because I wasn't following her rules.
Finish it. What did she say?
I mean, like, I was naming names. I'm like, oh yeah, the witness was Jay Wiles, and she was like, listen, I'm not naming names. Can you please, like at least? And I didn't know that she had certain rules, and I said, I was like, I don't have to follow your rules. I can do what I want. And then I was like, okay, maybe that's a bad idea. I should probably, honor her work. And I was like, okay, fine. I will honor. I was like, I will not trump anything that you might present later on, and I also will try to honor the rules of privacy that you're following.
So I actually want to ask you about that, because you did say at multiple points that you didn't want to trump what was coming. Mm-hmm. But did you know what was coming?
No, I would almost never know. I would just assume.
How did you know what not to publish?
I would only respond to what had aired. And then I'd have to wait till Thursday. And every Thursday morning at 6, that's the truth. I mean, Wednesday nights were hell. Thursday morning, I was like half asleep, pick up my phone, put on, and it was like, it had become a routine for like those 10 or 12 weeks. That every Thursday, I would listen to it first thing in the morning. Then I would spend the day letting it marinate, thinking about it, and then spending the night blogging about it. I never knew. I just assumed, for example, the first couple episodes, I'm like, at some point, she's going to do an episode about Gutierrez. At some point, she's going to, but she didn't. She's not going to tell me. I mean, obviously, she didn't need to, and she didn't. And, and I was going to say, at some point, I think, she didn't expect that I was going to be telling a story too. And I didn't expect it, and it happened. I don't think she was necessarily happy about it. But I told her, and I remember very clearly telling her, I'm going to shamelessly ride your coattails and your success and the attention, and I'm going to, because my agenda is different than your agenda. Mm-hmm. And my agenda is to get him out of jail. So I don't care about your agenda.
So you were a character, really, in a lot of ways. I mean, you were one of the few people who was like a first name in the podcast, and you engaged on a lot of platforms. How did that feel for you? I mean, I think what we all probably know is that you have very thick skin, and that seemed really apparent to me in the podcast. But I'm just wondering what it felt like to be on the receiving end of tremendous amounts of praise, but also a lot of criticism.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I never thought of myself as like I said, I have been blogging for a while. I've been writing for a while. I've been speaking on different issues for a while, and so I was already kind of social media, not savvy, but I was on social media. So I had these tools that I was already used to using. I had been on Reddit before. I knew how it worked. I just expected that I would be, and the thing is, his family also is not equipped to do these things. And so his family and Adnan themselves are like, yes, please continue to do this because they don't know how to do it. They don't have the tools. They don't have the experience. And I was able to do it. So it was weird for me to be evaluated in the same way that other people were being evaluated in the show, like Jay or like Adnan, because I'm like, listen, this is my loved one, I could run in circles screaming and saying, oh my God, get him out of jail, and you should just be like, maybe it's a stretch to say just be understanding that the position of pain that his loved ones are coming from. But the weird thing is, and I feel like it was like a what's it called? I don't know, a dress rehearsal. A little bit earlier in the year, I had gone through a really, really, really difficult controversy with a program that I was in, and that's when I really grew a thick skin. I got a lot of ugliness and feedback. And after that point, I personally made the decision that if I believe something is right, I cannot listen to the negativity. I have to just cut through it. So, thank you.
So, do you regret any of it? Do you regret any of the engagement online or offline? And especially knowing that none of us knew what Serial was going to become, would you still have taken it forward?
I kind of regret tweeting while angry. I did tell some people to F off a number of times on Twitter. I kind of regret it, but I kind of don't, so whatever. Reddit. Oh, God, my relationship with Reddit is crazy. So, it was so weird because when Reddit popped up, I'm like, oh my God, this is people who want to talk about this case like nonstop, like me.
Have you been on Reddit before?
Yeah, for years I had kind of lurked on different subs and stuff.
But that's not a dig at Reddit, by the way. That was like genuinely, I wondered.
No, I totally knew. I knew about Reddit. But I had never actually posted something. I had never actually I had an account, but I never maybe I had. I don't remember, but it had been actually a number of years since I had been on that platform. I don't know who sent me the link and said that it's on Reddit. And I was like, oh my God. And then I told Sarah and she's like, oh crap. But I was so excited. I said, me, Saad, Yusuf, we'll all get on there. And that was like a big disaster. So, because, we are coming at it from we're like, people want to talk about it, we'll respond. And when somebody, I don't know why we were not mentally prepared to say, well, I don't believe you. I think you did it. We didn't know how to handle that. So it was hard. I still watch it, but I hate him. But anyway, no, I'm kidding. I don't hate him.
Well, this is being recorded, and I'm sure we'll see it on Reddit.
So. I'm totally joking. There's some amazing people on Reddit, by the way, who have actually brought incredible information to light, and really contributed to, even some of the things that his attorney is looking at in terms of legal impact.
So yeah, that's a great segue to what I really want to know also, which is that you wanted Sarah to uncover something, and she uncovered a lot of things that you didn't know about. What amongst everything she found surprised you the most?
Maybe that memo was one of the most surprising things.
Tell us about the memo.
Yeah, so sometime in early summer, or maybe it was late spring, I can't remember, Sarah came to me and said, I found this document. She had FOIA'd police files that I didn't have. And so she found this 7-8 page memo in there that was a cultural competency memo on Islam and Muslims. And so she just brought it to me and put me on a mic and just was watching my reaction as I was going through it. And I was like, oh my God, what the fuck? What's going on here? It was just crazy because it was so ridiculously bigoted.
What did it say?
It was literally, think of every stereotype you can about Muslims and put them together in a completely incoherent document, and that's what it was. It was it had things like, when a Muslim man gives a woman a scarf, he now owns her. And when I read that, I read it again and again, and I'm like, Sarah, what this? And she's like, oh yeah, is that right? I'm like, no. No!
You took your scarf off and gave it back.
It had all kinds of conflations, women from Afghanistan and Iran and Quran and just,
Who wrote the memo and where, who was it for?
So, I guess the memo was for the police. Okay. It was for the state. It was written by a woman who has a firm that does cultural competency research, and she clearly should not be in that field. But I know who she is. I know the company, and out of respect for Sarah, because Sarah said that when she went to her, this woman was really kind of nervous. She thought she's going to get backlash. She probably thought the Muslim hordes will come to get her if they know who she wrote it. So Sarah said to her that she would keep her name confidential in the company, and I said I would too.
What about all the information that Sarah pulled? Was there anything in there, not actually just from Sarah, but even from Reddit and all these other sources? Did anything ever make you doubt your position?
Make me doubt my position?
Or doubt that your belief that Adnan is innocent?
No, I think actually Sarah, what she was able to uncover, and after Serial, they post Serial intercept interviews, really has kind of confirmed my belief in him. The thing is, I believe Adnan is innocent because I know Adnan, and because he's maintained his innocence, and because I also knew the case against him was weak. So whether you look at it as the case was weak, he shouldn't have been convicted, versus you think he's innocent, I believe both of those things are true. But I primarily believe he's innocent. So there was nothing that everything she brought, for, Jay's changing stories, Asia coming back in the picture, the cell phone stuff, The cell phone evidence also, the way Sarah covered it was interesting to me because I don't think she explored very deeply the reasons why some courts have declared it inadmissible. So there was that. But, what happened recently, just last week, and because I feel like the story is still unfolding, is Susan Simpson is an attorney who's blogging about the case, and I provided her and another attorney, Colin Miller, all the trial transcripts and everything, basically, pretty much all the case material. And I said, just go through it. I've looked at these documents a lot of times, but you can look at something sometimes a million times and not see what's right in front of you. And so there's these cell phone records the state had subpoenaed, AT&T had faxed to her, and there was a cover sheet on the fax. And I never looked at the cover sheet because who cares about the cover sheet? And Susan Simpson just identified last week a line on the cover sheet that said, from AT&T, that outgoing calls are not reliable to identify location, And that was the basis of the state's, that Jay's story was corroborated by the cell phone evidence, which showed us where Adnan went, and they had this whole map, showing where he was because of the cell phone pings. Here we have a document that either Gutierrez didn't see it the way I didn't see it, but AT&T themselves is telling you can't use this the way it was actually used. So, we are light years ahead of where we were a year ago, where we were at the end of a denial for post-conviction. We have a lot of hope now.
What's not in the podcast?
What's not in the podcast? One more thing, though, I forgot to mention. The physical evidence that was never tested. right? When Adnan had applied to Innocence Project of Maryland, they said, we only take cases where there's some physical evidence that there was some DNA testing we could do, and there was nothing we could provide because there was no physical evidence in this. We just knew there was like some fibers, they didn't match, a hair that didn't match, and that was it. Nobody realized that there are all these swabs that have been taken that had never been submitted. There are fingernail clippings, and that's kind of major. So I'm sorry, what was your next question?
It's just, we got 12 episodes and a lot of blogging.
What was not in it?
But what never made it into the podcast?
A number of things didn't make it, and I think one of the things, people have a lot of questions about, like, why didn't Adnan say X? Why did Adnan say Y? Why did Adnan just, how come he doesn't know where he was? Like, over and over and over. How come Adnan doesn't remember? Adnan remembers where he was all day. And in the attorney notes and his own handwritten notes, those things exist in the file. He's written out by his own hand. He was from here to here, here, from this time to this time he was here. He doesn't remember what happened in the evening. He smoked a blunt after track practice, and he's like, I don't know what, he's like, not only do I not remember that evening very well, he's like, it's fuzzy. He's like, I know that I was supposed to go, because that's another thing, it was the last few days of Ramadan. And for anybody who is an observant Muslim, like, you pretty much spend those evenings in the mosque a lot. And his family was very, very observant, so Adnan was expected to at least show his face. And the day after Heyman disappeared, Adnan was giving an Islamic lecture in the mosque. So that night he had to prepare for it. So, the fact, I don't think it was ever made clear that actually Adnan has written in his own hands and his attorney's, paralegal's hand, that this was where I was all day. It was just like in the evening after whatever it was he smoked, things were fuzzy for him. The second thing that people have said, why doesn't he just say, I didn't kill Hay? And the idea that Sarah talked to him for 40 plus hours and visited him countless times, he never said that, is preposterous. And I know it is because what happened was we turned over all the documents, everything to Sarah and her team, the tapes, the transcripts, everything, hard copies. And then they returned to me about 5-6 months ago, all of it on a USB, just so, obviously we would have access to these things. And it was not until not too long ago that there were a couple of files that I didn't really like, because I was looking really late at the old documents. I wasn't really looking at some of the ones that said that Sarah's own notes, because I didn't care what her notes really said so much. But in a certain file, I found a couple of letters, and I think they inadvertently included them. Because these are letters Adnan wrote to Sarah like a year ago, okay, like 2 or 3 letters. And I read the letters, and I emailed Sarah and I said, listen, this one letter, can I share this one letter? And she's like, hell no. I said, okay. But that letter literally spells out Adnan talking about Hay, talking about his relationship, talking about how painful it was, talking about how he felt about her, which again, we didn't really hear in the podcast. Talking about how I did not kill her. I would never have hurt her. I didn't have anything to do with this. And saying all the things that people I felt like wanted to hear him say. And I assume he must have also said in all that time. That wasn't really aired. And for them, maybe it was a decision where they have to, part of the interest of the show is to constantly keep the balance for, you can't have too much, maybe he did it, maybe he didn't. Like, that's how we, episode to episode, that's what kept people coming back. And so I wish that, and the thing is, I can say to Adnan, listen, can you write me a letter about how you felt about Hay and what happened? And, and I mean, it would be totally contrived then. I feel like that it wouldn't have the same impact as this letter that he wrote to Sarah. But of course, that's her letter, so I'm not going to share it. I'll just talk about it.
So now that it's all over, he's still in prison.
Yeah.
So what does this mean for him at the end of the day?
Well, today is the 12th. We have a so there's a petition to basically asking for permission to file another post-conviction appeal that has been pending for the last year, and the court has said the state needs to respond by the 14th, which is 2 days, to this petition. They're very interested in one of the 2 issues raised. One of the issues was McClain. The second issue was a plea offer, or a plea deal. And the McClain issue they ignored because it had been pretty much killed at the hearing. But this Court of Special Appeals is like, we want to know more about this plea. Did Gutierrez ever ask you about a plea for her client?
And is the podcast helping you make that argument?
I don't know if the podcast actually wasn't necessary for that. That was already documented. And that was an issue raised in 2010 when the post-conviction was filed. By the way, back to the serendipity issue. In 2010, when the post-conviction appeal was filed, in order to talk about Christina Gutierrez's ineffective assistance, one of the articles cited by Justin Brown was Sarah Koenig's article, which I mean, nobody knew in 2010 that she would be back in this case. So I thought that was really interesting. But no, so there is that. So, that avenue has a lot of hope because the court has taken special interest in that issue. And also because Asia might be back in play because of what happened, on the podcast. So we're waiting for the state to come back, and then we'll see what the court decides. If they decide that we were going to go through that they'll give us a new post-conviction appeal, then we're going to throw everything we have at it. And then you have the Innocence Project work, which is separate, and they're kind of, I think, waiting for, I don't know what, but they're waiting right now on filing the petition to test the evidence.
Okay, so my final question, because I know there must be questions in the audience, is that you now have a much bigger platform than you did 6 months ago, which is not to say that you didn't already have a large platform, but a lot of people are listening to you now. What will you do with it?
It's so odd to me because until now, my blog, my little blog, I was been writing about just Muslim issues, basically. A year ago, I was writing about this video that came out called The Mipsters, which is young Muslim women who are very hip, and this outlash against them. And I wrote about that. So it's things that are very kind of particular to our community. And I've been thinking about that. There are issues I want to write about that I'm okay, but that's going to be very specific to the community. And what does that mean for people who don't understand what's going on here or are not interested? But I feel like I have to go back to that. That's really what I'm interested in. So I'm going to continue to write about that. I contribute to Time on faith issues, and I contribute to New America Foundation on national security issues in terms of writing. But both of them have asked me to write about the case in Serial. And so I'm a little bit kind of serialed out. In a way, because there's only so many times you can. So, but I'll go back to writing about what I write about. I have a career in CVE, and I have to get back to that.
Okay, thank you. So we'll take questions at either of these two microphones, if anyone has questions at all. I can't possibly have asked everything.
Maybe I just talked a lot and I said everything. It's good. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for coming. I'm a documentary film student here, and one of the most interesting things for me listening to Serial was that there was recording happening as we were doing the podcast. So I'm wondering what that experience was like to have sort of still an unknown relationship with Sarah and the story as it's unfolding.
I think it was definitely very stressful for us. And I'm assuming it was stressful for Sarah. It had to have been because, there were people Hey Lee's brother got on Reddit and posted. All these people, even people she wasn't able to connect to, suddenly were coming out of nowhere and telling their own stories and taking the story here and there. So I'm sure, but it was stressful for us because we didn't know. We didn't know who was going to come out of where and say what and what impact it would have on the case. And we realized it had been kind of open. The floodgates have been open, and all kinds. I've gotten all kinds of messages from people, just crazy messages, and people have I have leads for you, I have theories for you, I know who did it. I have, so it's we didn't realize how much you're gonna get back. So it's stressful, but I personally I wonder, how if she's gonna think about that with the second season, how she's, And I also wonder if maybe if I had not done the blogging, what that would have meant, But I think people are just so fascinated; they wanted to take it on themselves. So.
So you super briefly mentioned the Intercept interviews, and I wanted to ask a question about that because throughout, at least listening to Serial, I'm not sure what it was like from your perspective. Sarah Koenig was always sympathetic to Adnan, even when she doubted him, whereas The Intercept has very clearly taken a hard line against him. And I'm just kind of curious, not even your response to the contents of those interviews, but more kind of the tone and how they're being reported. Like the interview with the prosecutor, whose name I've forgotten, opens with a really long essay basically talking about how this is not a failure of the justice system. And I'm really curious to hear about what your response was to that.
I don't know if you're following me on Twitter or not, but my response is on Twitter. I've been blocked by Natasha. That should tell you. So, my big concern with that was not so much that she's not entitled to her opinion, right? Or anybody's not entitled to their opinion. But number one, there were clear errors of fact in the stories. And I reached out to her. Then I just blogged. I'm like, okay, fine. Like the pleading the fifth type of thing, right? Which was an issue that was raised in that. And a lot of people talked about that and said, oh, somebody pled the fifth. That means this person had been confessed to by Adnan. I'm like, no, that person didn't. Here's documentation to prove it. But she wouldn't make the correction. And that, and also the idea that this is somebody who does not have access to the kind of documents that Sarah did. Natasha does not have access. She doesn't have the trial transcripts. She doesn't have, all these things that Sarah took like a year to look at and spent. And so I was like, I thought it was really weird. But here's a little thing that not a lot of people know. Somebody very high up in The Intercept actually contacted me and said that I'm sorry and I'm ashamed that we published it. Okay. So I think that she is getting, it's one thing that for me, it's obviously personally offensive that she's so sure about her, where she stands on Adnan without having full information and then reporting incorrect information. But I think also in the world of journalism that, they've made a lot of, they've made a lot of missteps and people are not liking it. Other journalists are not liking it either. So. Thanks.
I'm just curious how you'd like this story to unfold in the future as there is communication, because clearly there's a lot of people that want to know, where it goes from here.
I had always thought that, I can't, I think by episode 9, I was like, I can't wait till this is over. Because then we're going to start like fundraising, then we're going to do like petition, then we're going to do like grassroots advocacy, like getting the local communities together to put, to meet with public officials, this and that. And then the Intercept stuff happens. So, I'm hoping the way it unfolds is that, Jay's interview was great. As much as, I don't agree with Natasha, Jay's interview I think was very helpful to our case. So if those types of things continue to happen, that's great. Keep talking and keep proving that you totally lied 15 years ago. So those things are helpful in a legal sense. And for me, it's really about that, what is useful to us in court. You have the court of public opinion, which can help, I think, influence how the state will act going forward. Like, for example, if we got to a point where Adnan was given a chance to get a new trial, I think the state would really carefully think about, do we want to retry this, considering millions of people are like paying attention? Or should we just offer some kind of a deal? So
Do you think that?
Do I think they would offer a deal?
No. Do you think that that the courts would be influenced by the podcast?
I think the state could. Not the court so much, but the state could. So if the DA's office is up against a wall and they say, well, we're going to go back to court and retry this case, versus let's just maybe give them an Alford plea. These types of things, even in West Memphis 3 case, this kind of happened. They're going to make a decision about how they're going to proceed, right? And now they have their own prosecutor, Urich, who's made certain, in his interview, he's made, again, certain claims, which will soon be rebutted by Adnan's attorney. Keep an eye on some court filings coming in the next couple weeks. So I think they're going to have to weigh these things. Yeah, why not? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Hi, you touched on this earlier, kind of your struggle with your relationship with Sarah, kind of a attorney source journalist relationship. Can you talk more about kind of how you address that and the complexity of, the relationship between attorney and sources and journalists? Between attorney, sources? I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Like being a source and working with a journalist and being your friendship and that kind of thing.
It is hard, and I have time and time again, and I have in almost every interview I've given, and this is completely sincere and authentic, said that Sarah has done a tremendous job, and I will, until my last living day, be grateful to her for the work she's done. I have always said this. I wish Sarah had been an advocate and said, I'm going to prove him innocent, but of course she has a career ahead. It would make no sense for her to to tie off to a conviction like that, where you don't know what's going to happen, right? And I think Sarah, I will say this though, before Sarah decided that and committed like a team and resources, she met with Adnan's attorneys. She met with Justin. She met with Chris Floor, who was his original attorney at his bail hearing, right when he was arrested. And I know that Chris has told me that Sarah said, listen, I don't want to get into something where I'm going to spend all this time and energy, and it looks like he kind of did it. She's like, what do you think? And he's like, I think he's innocent. I've always believed he's innocent. She's like, so for her to even take it on, there had to be a possibility, a decent possibility, that this is an innocent man in jail. So even I appreciate her doing that, like giving us the benefit of the doubt for that. But having said that, yeah, it was complicated because, there were, and she talked about this in the podcast. She said, sometimes me and Adnan, we're all like manipulating each other, like, what is he going to think if I say this? And I don't know if I talked about this in, like, for example, the last time I met her, she came to my house to do an interview, or to do like a wrap up at the end. It never aired. And it was at my parents' house she met us. And, now I'm thinking, it's Sarah. I gave her a hug, have some tea, here's some samosas. And my mom's there. My mom's older and she's elderly and she loves Adnan and she's, prays for him all the time. And my mom's like, who is this? I'm like, this is Sarah Koenig. She's a journalist. And my mom said, you doing a story on Adnan? Because she's not listening to the podcast. She's like, let me tell you about Adnan. The day they found her body, he was sitting right here in my, dining room chair. And I'm like, no, he wasn't, Mom. And so and it's like, so I'm like, oh my God, Sarah's going to be like, is that right? Let me start writing this down. And I was like, oh my God. So in Urdu, I'm like, Mom, she's a reporter. Like, you can't just say whatever, she's very emotional. She's not remembering things. So I had to kind of keep that. If that was just a friend, I would have been like, she don't know what she's talking about. But it is a reporter. So I said to Sarah was a little bit like, what's going on? And I was like, oh, she's just misremembering. And that was, so I was conscious of like, if somebody says something to her, what is that going to mean? Like, in a case. And in a way, like I wanted to be over so I could actually just have a real conversation with her and not have to worry what it's going to look like. So complicated, I guess, is the short answer. Sorry.
Especially with regards to the episode where she talked about Adnan Syed in the mosque and that whole episode.
That was a really weird episode to me. And I think Sarah felt like she had to do it. And the reason she had to do it was she was getting slammed by a couple of people who kept contacting her saying, you have to let us tell this story. And so that particular story about the mosque stealing thing, of course, he was in 8th grade, whatever. The guy's like, he stole, I stole, but he's a good guy. I don't know why that was so pressing. But I felt like Sarah, if she had not given that much time to that, because these people were very vocal on Reddit. And it was out there. So she somehow had to give him the time and then just, get beyond it. But beyond that, the Muslim community, I thought she was okay with it. I think she didn't get the bias issues as well because I don't know if she did. I don't think she did. But in a way, it was weird because it was kind of like a expose on like the internal workings of a close-knit Muslim community and what the kids are doing and they're leading double lives, they're doing. And, but the thing is, the community already went through that. 15, 16 years ago, we like already went through that community. So I don't think that fazed anybody again. When it all got blown up again, it didn't faze anybody. But I think Sarah also was confused. Like she came to me and she said, there are people who want to say nice, from your community, who want to say nice things about Adnan, but they don't want their names known. What is that about? I was like, I don't know. So, but that's how sometimes very, communities that are very tight, they don't want to rock certain boats that they are, so.
Say a little bit more about that. When you say that Sarah didn't quite get the bias issue, what do you mean?
I think that you have to, I see no reason she would, unless she was a Muslim.
What do you call the bias issue?
The bias issue is that the way the motive was framed in this case, which is that this is a Muslim male who killed a girl because she dishonored him. And this was actually language that was used. An organization that's called SABA, it's a South Asian Bar Association. It's a national, not just North American organization of South Asian attorneys. And they've taken special interest in the case because they're very troubled by the anti-Muslim and ethnic kind of bias that's in the case. And, so I've given them all the documents and they've said, that almost either the word Pakistani, Muslim, or Islam was mentioned almost 300 times in the second trial. Almost 300 times for apparently according to Uric, a routine domestic murder, domestic, violence case. So clearly that issue was there propelling stuff. And I've always felt that because Adnan didn't have a requisite history of domestic violence, of anybody saying that he threatened Hay, of any kind of record of anything, really, criminal record, that this kind of plugged that space in where if a Muslim guy does not have this history, the fact that he's Muslim is enough that he's already predisposed to this. So I don't think she got that, but I think a lot of Muslims and a lot of brown people got it. Yeah.
Next question.
Yeah, I mean, just to comment that I thought Kevin Garrett was brilliant. I mean, in a kind of a sick way. But I mean,
Yeah.
really, he played that card very well, and he figured out how to use Jay's test.
Oh, yeah.
How you would counter Jay's to make it actually even more believable. Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He. I mean, I have said this before. And there were a number of, it was the Muslim community, the Korean community, and the Black urban community, and he's in the middle. A ring keeper. He pitted us all very well against each other.
So, I guess my question. So, I do some advocacy in kind of a different field, coming from that world, and I do a lot of documents, right? And they're very, very valuable. Like, the problem though is that I've come not to trust anything I read. Right? Like unless I see the original documents, and I think that's the value of something like this. Is most of the time when you read the newspaper, you just see that's it. You don't know that there's not, 9 different things behind it. And you have an opportunity like this when people are following it so closely that they can understand these issues of, honor killings, and you can talk about the problems of your first. I was actually shocked as a non-lawyer to find out how high the bar was once you're convicted. Like it really is pretty tough.
Yeah.
Go back and say my lawyer sucked.
Yeah.
There are a lot of issues about the legal system. I mean, the role of the prosecutor. I mean, the bad evidence.
Yeah.
You don't want to find bad evidence. I mean, I just see this as an incredible opportunity, though, to take this and to make some of these changes. I mean, in the legal system, it seemed like it's time for recalibration. I know you want to work with resolution, but I mean, this just seems like there's big stuff out there.
Yeah. No, I mean, look. Yeah. I mean, I think we have to remember that, Adnan is not a odd case, really. I mean, there are many, many wrongful convictions that happen. We've executed innocent men in our country's history. So it's not news that there are some very deeply broken, flawed systems here. It's not news that there are all kinds of interests that are not in line with the defendant's interest. And, there's relationships sometimes on the ground that you just don't understand. There's like backstories. There's deals that shouldn't be being made. I mean, this happens in a lot of cases. And I don't know I feel like this has been brought to light many, many times. Maybe not on this scale.
This is what I'm saying. Like, that's what's so different about a case like this. When people know the need, they know the
Right.
interview date, they know what the snack food was, right? I mean, people get it in a way that it just goes over the head. You can hear it,
Yeah.
but you don't know it. I'm just saying, this doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Oh, and then certainly this.
It feels like an opportunity.
It is. I hope somebody does something with it. Because, no, definitely. And I've had a number of people reach out who are committed, advocates, and they work on issues like death penalty issues, who work on, in fact, there's one organization in Pennsylvania that actually works on life sentences, that inside the prison, a life sentence is considered a death sentence, right? So a number of these advocates have reached out, and so I think I'm really waiting for the incredible attention to, die down just a little bit, so I can actually, I said I'm willing to work and do whatever you need, I'll post your articles, I'll do whatever I can to help you on those issues. Yeah. Thank you, though.
So we have time definitely for one last question, possibly two. So we'll take your question.
Hi, so just sort of bringing this full circle, you're here talking to us about social media advocacy, and just wondering how did you bring this, how do you explain this era, the social media era that we're in now, to someone like Adnan, who's in a maximum security prison, has no idea how much this case has been sensationalized, for better or for worse? How has that changed the beginning?
Honestly, I have tried to really keep it balanced and really limit it. I almost don't want him to know how much chatter there is about it, because I think on some level, and we all feel like this, that, on one hand, it's like you want it's hard because you know that, okay, this is real life. It's not a show. But we need the show. We need the show to help change what's reality. So, like, and for Adnan, but Adnan is the one who's serving the time in a maximum security facility. It'll be almost 16 years in a few more weeks, since he's a child, 17. So for him I don't want him necessarily to know, like, how much exposure. So I've been kind of limiting it. I've been sending him, like, articles that newspapers are writing about the show. I'm not sending him, like, bajillions of tweets. I haven't yet. He's been told about them. He's talked to Yusuf, his younger brother, and he's told him about them. And I'll print them up. And I think Adnan, he's much more actually kind of measured on these issues because he has spent years now studying. Like, he could probably be an attorney as soon as he gets out. But he's spent years, like, kind of studying how, wrongful convictions, like what happens and all these avenues. He's like, listen, Rabia, there have been a lot of cases that have gotten a lot of media attention and nothing actually happened for the person. So keep that in mind. So, but he's generally a pretty positive person. Oh, thanks.
So unfortunately, we're at 2:00, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time because I know you all have a lot of places to go. So thank you, Rabia, for taking
It's been a pleasure.